Welcome to the Israel-Palestine Report. So much is going on in the Middle East. I keep on opening all of my videos, all my lives with that over the past several weeks, or over the past at least 12 days. So much is going on. Israel and the United States continue to attack Iran. Iran is continuing to launch missiles towards Israel. Hezbollah is continuing to launch missiles, rockets, and drones towards Israel. Israel is invading Lebanon. Meanwhile, Iran is continuing to pummel the entire Gulf states, including Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, the list, Kuwait, the list goes on. And meanwhile, the question everyone's asking, how is this going to end? Does this have an end game? Is the fact that Iran elected now new supreme leader, is that going to be something that takes us out of this or going to spiral us even further? President of the United States, Donald Trump, continues to talk about the fact that it's going to have a quick end and is going to be very successful, but very obviously he's responding to the rising oil prices and the pressures that are coming from the United States and the entire world. What is happening? What is happening in the Middle East? What is happening in Iran? What is happening in Israel? What is happening in Lebanon? These are going to be the things that we discuss over the next 45 minutes to an hour. We'll see how we do. As always, very nice to see some familiar faces, some familiar names. Welcome to everyone who this is your first time joining. What we're going to do today, I'm going to talk about several things and mostly going to field questions because there's so much confusion about what is happening in the Middle East. First thing I'm going to talk about is the war aims. What does the United States want to achieve, or at least what does it say that it wants to achieve? What does Israel say that it wants to achieve, and how close is it to achieving that? So that's the first thing I want to talk about. Then I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Iran, including in the last hour or two. There are some interesting developments happening on the ground in Iran with regards to Israeli attacks against the Iranian Basij. We're going to talk about that. Then I'm going to pivot and talk about Lebanon. Lebanon has been another arena that has opened up. There is now very, very intensive fighting happening between Israel and Hezbollah, and Israel just recently issued a very public declaration and threat that if Lebanon does not act against Hezbollah, Israel is going to start attacking Lebanese targets, national targets in Lebanon, likely the airport in Beirut, the infrastructure of the electrical companies, rather than just Hezbollah. Going to talk about that. After that, I'm going to talk a little bit about where things stand in the war, where things stand in terms of the amount of missiles that have been fired, the amount of drones that have been fired. Why is Iran attacking Gulf countries much more than is attacking Israel? We'll talk a little bit about that and where things stand. As people join in, I'm also going to say that if you want to understand a little bit more about how we got to where we are now, the history of Iran, and some of the complexities with regards to the Islamic Revolution, how it came about, how Iran went from being an ally of Israel, the United States, to being this sort of pariah of the Middle East, I'm putting into the chat right now a link to register for a webinar that I am giving on Sunday, this coming Sunday. It's going to be at 1 p.m. In the East Coast and 10 a.m. on the West Coast. And there we're going to talk about essentially all these things. How did we get to where we are now? So if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about the complexities of how things developed, check out that link that I just put into the chat. And again, happy to see everyone there. My main aim in that webinar is to try to help everyone understand how the hell did we get from a situation where Iran was a close ally of the United States and Israel to where we are now in the Middle East. With that, welcoming more people that are coming in. Feel free to say hi. Let me know where you're from. Let me know if you have any specific questions. As always, if you have any questions, please preface that with the word question so that I'll just be able to filter that out of the chat. And going to take a moment to breathe, have a drink of water, and then going to dive into what we're going to talk about this lovely evening. Got one person from Los Angeles, someone else from Ohio. Welcome, everyone. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, closer to where I am. I'm in Boston. We're moving eastward from Los Angeles to Ohio, Oklahoma, San Antonio, Chicago. Okay. And people started throwing questions. Current state of Iranian Air Force. We're going to talk about the Iranian military. Denver Johnson, thank you for asking that. We're going to talk about the Iranian military. If I don't answer that, then please ask me that a little bit later. From Ottawa, Canada. I miss Canada. I lived in Canada for 2 years. arguably best 2 years of my life. Very, very much miss Canada. It's cold. I know in Ottawa you're cold. Enjoy Canada. Also going to apologize in advance. I'll be looking down a little bit more throughout this conversation, also because it's a very intensive night of missiles flying in the Middle East. So there's going to be a lot of alerts coming to my phone, but also because I collected a lot of data in the last couple of hours in order to bring you the most up-to-date data, but I didn't have time to print it out. So a lot of it is in front of me on the computer and on my phone. So apologies. I'll be looking down a little bit more than usual rather than directly at the screen. Okay, where I'm going to start is where the title of this live stream, do the United States and Israel agree on the war aims? And this is a question that more people have been asking recently. And the reason that more people are asking this is because when it comes to the war aims, the United States has been very explicit officially about what the war aims are. Then the US President, Trump, has said different things about what the war aims might be and has started to pivot in the last couple of days. Israel, in turn, has said completely different things about what the war aims are. And that's important because that relates to several things. It relates also to the targets that the different countries are bombing. And at the same time, also relates to how this might end. This will end. Now, it may end in a big blowout of regime change and the Iranian regime collapsing in Iran. And if you're interested in understanding what that means, check out my latest video on my channel. I there talk about what regime change means. But more likely, at this stage, it's going to end in some sort of deal, some sort of time, some sort of declaration when the United States says enough. And then it's going to be a question of what did they achieve? So let's talk for a minute about what the sides are hoping to achieve in this war. Happy to see people coming from Bombay, India. Okay, welcome, 6:45 a.m. there. Good morning to you then. And to all the people that have just joined in, again, I'm putting into the chat, if you want to understand a little bit more about what's going on, register for my webinar. It is this Sunday, going to talk about the history of Iran, the history of the Islamic Revolution, how we ended up, where things are now. You have a link to that in the chat just now. So, when it comes to the war aims, both Israel and the United States launched a joint campaign against Iran on February 28th. We're now 12 days into that. Important to note, neither one of the countries is officially calling this a war, because in order for this to be a war, then they would have to run it through parliament, through different types of budgetary considerations. So both the US president and the Israeli prime minister are calling this something akin to a special military operation, which is the code name that Russia gave for its invasion of Ukraine, which is also not considered a war in Russia. They're calling it an intense military campaign or a special campaign. In Israel, this is called Operation Lion's Roar, the United States Epic Fury, but theoretically it's not a war. I'm referring to it as a war because that is de facto what's happening on the ground. When it comes to the United States, 2 days into the launching of that war on February 28th, the United States put out an official statement. And so I was writing, it's a little excursion, thank you. The aims that the United States put out, and this is not Trump saying, the aims that were put out by the State Department and the Department of War explicitly said that what the United States wants to achieve in Iran is, and I'm quoting, 1, destroying Iran's navy. 2, destroying Iran's missile capabilities. 3, preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. And 4, preventing Iran from supporting proxy groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen. So regarding that, the United States, again, despite Trump's rhetoric about a new Middle East, oil rights, changing the entire Middle East, new regimes, etc., the official aims that the military put out are these. With regard to destroying Iran's navy, the United States has actually made quite a lot of progress in that. If that is, again, I'm not even getting to this should be a war aim, legitimate, not legitimate. As you know, that's not what I talk about. What I talk about is the facts on the ground. When it comes to destroying Iran's navy, the United States has made a lot of strides in that. Now, it's, I will say, quite impossible to get accurate data because the United States is saying through the president, everything's done, Iran has no navy left. it's very obvious that Iran still has a navy and they still have naval capabilities. Iran is saying our navy is unharmed. Obviously, both of those are not true. Obviously, it's somewhere in the middle. The United States has carried out massive attacks against Iran's navy. Primarily, it has destroyed, according to the United States, between 40 to 60 ships. What's more important is it has carried out massive attacks at Iran's ports, its naval ports that exist throughout the Persian or Arab Gulf, depending who you ask. That is the big game changer. That is something that will take Iran probably several years to rebuild. Is it destroyed forever? No. There's no such thing as destroying something forever. But that is the big thing. If Iran has several ships left, that's not the game changer. The game changer is, do they have port capabilities, the ability to redevelop a strong navy? That really has been crippled by the United States. The second facet, destroying Iran's missile capabilities. To that end, it has actually been much more Israel that has targeted most of Iran's missile capabilities, and this relates to two things. It relates to the launchers. Iran has deployed launchers of ballistic missiles across the entire territory of the country, and Iran's very big. It's important to understand ballistic missiles are what matters. Cruise missiles matter a lot less. Matter a lot less because cruise missiles take a long time to get to their target. Ballistic missiles from Iran to Israel, even from Iran to Europe, take between 10 to 15 minutes. That's all they take. And so they are the much bigger threat. Theoretically, Iran could develop ballistic missiles that will also reach the United States. It's unlikely at this point. It might happen in several years, but the ballistic missile capabilities are what is being targeted. It's being targeted both by the United States, but primarily by Israel. The launchers, Israel also started a campaign in the last several days of targeting the manufacturing capabilities. So to not only stop Iran's capabilities right now, but also take it back in terms of its ability to rebuild ballistic missiles. Item 3, and again, for those of you who are just joined, what I'm discussing is the United States declared war aims. Then I want to talk about Israel's. The United States, item 3, preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. That is very vague. What does it mean to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons? So far, in the last decade, the United States has gone about this in two different ways. First, there was the nuclear deal. The nuclear deal was signed by US President Obama back in 2015, and it was a 10-year deal that was supposed to be based on agreements. Iran will not develop nuclear weapons. Then, the US President Trump, but back in 2017, pulled out of the nuclear deal, said Iran is violating it. And so the United States went more towards sanctions. And this escalated by 2025, leading towards the 12-day war, what is known as, in most of the world, the war that happened in June of 2025, when Israel and the United States carried out massive attacks against Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, there is a catch there, because at the end of the 12-day war in June, both the US President and the Israeli Prime Minister declared that the nuclear program has been demolished. And so that raises questions when now US President Trump is saying if this war had not been launched, then Iran would have nuclear weapons within weeks. Theoretically, it should have been demolished back then, according to the President of the United States and Israeli Prime Minister. Obviously, that was not the case. And so right now, there have been many more attacks carried out against Iran's nuclear capabilities. That means attacks against the nuclear facilities in Natanz and Isfahan, in other places, also in Tehran. However, I will say again, if those are destroyed, that doesn't mean that Iran can't rebuild them. Again, see the difference between June 2025 and here we are now, a mere 9 months later, and then since Israel felt the need to attack again. Why I'm pointing that out is because it is very likely that for the United States to actually achieve that war aim, it will have to be done through some sort of deal. There's some sort of agreement, either Iran removing all of its enriched uranium from the areas within Iran, or some sort of other enforcement mechanism. There's been all kinds of rumors the United States might want to deploy commando forces on the ground in order to retrieve, so to speak, or steal the nuclear enriched uranium material from Iran. That's unlikely to succeed at this point, I will say. Iran has reportedly mined up all the areas around their nuclear facilities. Either way, the third aim of the war of the United States, I will say, is unlikely to be achieved through force alone. It is likely to be part of a deal that happens later on. The fourth aim of the United States, preventing Iran from supporting proxy groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen. That too is not really tangible. Iran can say they'll stop supporting them, they can start again in 6 months. That also is not going to be achieved through force alone. It is very likely only going to be achieved through some sort of deal. That is with regards to the war aims of the United States. Where does Israel stand? Where does Israel stand with regards to what it wants to achieve in the war? Israel has not put out any such list. Israel has not put out any such list with regards to what it wants to achieve in the war. Instead, Israel has relied on statements that were made by the Prime Minister and Defense Minister, and they have focused on two different things. Initially, they focused on stopping Iran's nuclear capabilities and curtailing the missile program very quickly. After the successful assassination of the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, they started talking about regime change. Started about an end to the murderous regime in Iran, an end to the head of the snake in Iran, creating the conditions for the Iranian people to rise up and retake their destiny, and an end to the hostilities between Israel and Iran. Those are very different as far as war aim goes. And why did I decide to focus on that initially? Because that difference in the aims of the United States versus the aims in Israel have started to create some tensions with regards to the target packages, with regards to who is targeting what. And the biggest example of this was when Israel 2 days ago carried out massive attacks against the oil production capabilities and the facilities in the oil fields of Iran and Tehran. Iran has many different oil fields, has a lot of oil refineries. This was one specific attack. It did create fireballs going up in Tehran. And this, as far as Israel said, was part of the aims. It was part of the aims of weakening the regime in order to actually bring about possibly an economic collapse, leading to protesters coming out to the streets and the regime being overthrown. In turn, in the United States, that attack came under heavy condemnation. According to a lot of rumors, again, this is not official reports, but enough reporters stated this that makes me believe it, enough credible reporters that makes me believe it. The Trump administration sent fiery warnings to Israel not to carry out such an attack again for two reasons. It said, one, there is a desire in the United States for Iran not to collapse economically, regardless of what happens. If the war ends and the Iranian regime still stands, an economic collapse after that is the makings of a civil war and deterioration to chaos, which in the Middle East, as we saw in Syria and Iraq, as we saw in Afghanistan, is the makings of a situation the United States doesn't want. Secondly, if there is regime change, if the protesters do take to the streets and the regime falls, the United States wants that regime to be able to have economic viability. So similarly, it doesn't want its oil fields to collapse. That's the first reason. Regardless of what happens, the United States does not want economic collapse in Iran. And a second reason was the United States, obviously, according to Trump, obviously wants oil rights. The United States is very, very interested in the oil rights in Iran, again, regardless of the regime, regardless of if it is a new regime or the current regime, the United States still wants to see oil production in Iran. Trump really cares about oil rights, rights for US companies, etc. As a result, we are starting to see disagreements between Israel and the United States. And why I'm putting the highlight on this for the first 20 minutes of discussion here is because those disagreements might escalate with regards to how the war ends. Obviously, Israel cannot outvote the United States. If the United States says the war ends, the war ends. But until then, leading up to that, Israel might try, for example, to assassinate the new supreme leader, might try to do all kinds of things that are associated much more with its far-reaching goal of regime change in Iran, whereas the United States seemingly is limiting its attacks at this point more towards the military capabilities and towards the nuclear capabilities of Iran, much less the larger regime change goals that Israel has set. And if those things start to escalate, if that disagreement starts to escalate, that actually may be one of the things that brings about a faster end to the war. And why do I say that is because we have seen examples of this when the United States was supportive of Israel, regardless of what it was doing in Gaza, but when Israel went too far, quote unquote, and carried out an assassination attempt in Qatar, within 2 weeks, Trump puts out a peace deal and says to Israel, you're done with your war in Gaza. You're done now. Similarly, when it came to the 12-day war back in June, Israel was continuing to carry out attacks, and it had planes in the air about to carry another attack in Tehran. Trump decided enough, and at that moment, he called the Israeli Prime Minister and said, turn the planes around. And the planes in Iraq turned around and went back. So the fact that there's this disagreement is not just about how the war is going to end and about which targets are selected. It may actually be one of the things that bring about an end to the war if Israel does something, again, attacks, for example, oil refineries, or something that the United States doesn't approve of. That may be enough for Trump to scale back and say, enough of this now. And that's why this seemingly mild disagreement, because both countries are bombing Iran very heavily. I'm going to talk about the stats in a minute. But despite the seemingly mild disagreement, that disagreement might actually be very, very instrumental when it comes to a potential end to the war spiraling down. And that's why I'm highlighting it. For those of you who have just joined again, in the last several minutes, some people have joined. Once again, welcome. We are talking about the spiraling situation in the Middle East. We've just talked about the war aims of the two countries, Israel and the United States, in Iran. Next thing I'm going to talk about is just some data that I'm going to bring about the types of attacks and why Iran is attacking a lot more of the proxy areas, a lot more of the neighboring areas in the Arab or Persian Gulf rather than Israel. Talk about that a little bit. Then we'll also talk about Lebanon and Hezbollah and what's happening there. In addition to that, I'm again going to say, if you're interested in understanding a little bit more of the context and how we got to this pretty crazy situation in the Middle East right now, I'm putting into the chat again a link to my upcoming webinar. It is on Sunday. It is talking about the history of Iran, the Islamic Revolution, and how we got to where we are now. If you're interested, hit that link. Really happy to see as many people there as possible. I'm now scrolling back a little bit to look at some of the questions that have come in. So again, good morning from Bombay, India. Again, nice to see you from there, from Texas. Israel joining us from Israel again. I'm always impressed at the hour that Israel is up. Okay, Enzo says, I saw Trump blurt out that it literally equates VZ models with Venezuela model with Iran. Trump has said that he very much wants the Venezuela model of essentially the United States deciding who controls and who is the leader and the head of state in Venezuela. He wants to import that to Iran. Iran so far has heavily rejected that. If you want to know more about that, Enzo, please check out my last video that I uploaded on my channel, where I specifically talked about the election of the Supreme Leader, and I expanded on that. I just don't want to spend a lot of time on that now. I expanded on the election of the Supreme Leader, what that means, and how that relates to the relationship with the United States. Denver Johnson says, please do cover the state of the Iranian Air Force too. What are their aircraft capabilities as it stands today? So I did promise that. I'm again checking my phone because there's constant updates with regards to what is happening in the Middle East. I'll be honest, I'm not a military expert. I cannot speak to specifically the type of planes that Iran has. I will say that most of their Air Force has effectively been rendered inoperative by Israeli and United States initial attacks. Their attacks not only knocked out their air defenses, there were also massive attacks that happened on the airfields and the air bases, both of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards as well as of the Iranian Air Force. To the best of my knowledge, Denver Johnson, that Air Force, the Iranian Air Force, is right now not really functional. But I will say, I'm putting a lot of asterisks there. That's to the best of my knowledge. Because again, I'm not a military expert, I'm a political expert. I look at the politics of the different sides, the different planes and types that they have. I will say, if you're interested, you can check out, I usually do interviews on live now on Fox. You can see that there is a person there named Hal, who is a military expert, who much more talks about the military capabilities. Other comments. Fran says that the Shah should never have banned the hijab. Again, Fran, please join that webinar on Sunday. I'm going to talk, I don't promise to talk about the Shah banning the hijab, but I'm going to talk about the role of the Shah in all this, his son, what this means, etc. Taking a moment's pause to breathe and going to see if there are any other questions as they come in. Again, happy to see everyone here. I know the situation is very, very complicated in the Middle East. What I want to continuously encourage people, I get a lot of emails and a lot of questions. It's okay to be confused. Even more than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even more than the situation in Gaza, even more than Hamas, PLO, Palestinian Authority, What's happening in Iran is extremely confusing, mostly because the three countries, Israel, the United States, and Iran, are not being transparent about what they're achieving, what their aims are, where exactly attacks are being. The leaders of all those countries are putting out statements that often their militaries then contradict. The US president said all oil tankers will have military Navy escort through the Straits of Hormuz. The US Navy then put out a statement saying that's not true. We don't have the ships to do that. Similarly, in Israel, Netanyahu is putting out all kinds of statements about what's being attacked in Iran. Then the military says it's not happening. Certainly in Iran, there's a lot of misinformation. So it's really okay to be confused. It's really okay to not fully understand. I'm here to give you the best of my analysis, but I could be wrong too on some of these things because it's very confusing what's happening. So I'm just encouraging people, give yourself a break if you're confused about what is happening. Other question, Jordy asks, what are their capabilities in the Straits of Hormuz? So when it comes to Iran and the Straits of Hormuz are very, very narrow. And this is an area, tomorrow I'm actually having something interactive installed here, so I'll be able to pull up different maps and not just have a map of Gaza, and then I'll be able to show the Straits of Hormuz and how that's going to be. Iran is capable of shutting down transit across the Straits of Hormuz. They're capable of doing that in two ways. First of all, it's a very narrow area that Iran controls most of the coast of, and so it's enough to fire a couple of drones, a couple of missiles, and they're capable of damaging ships. And again, will they sink ships? No. But these are civilian ships. These are oil tankers. They can't withstand a bunch of missiles. So Iran is capable of doing that and really shutting down world commerce through Hormuz. A second thing that they're capable of doing, that they have done according to reports, is lay down sea mines that are under the ocean. Don't ask me how they work. I don't really know. But I know that there are mines in the sea. And with that, they are capable of actually shutting down a lot of international commerce. The United States has said that they managed to destroy most of the ships that Iran was using to lay down mines under the sea. Different reports in the United States also have said that Iran has successfully laid down mines. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. What I do know is that Iran is capable of effectively shutting down international commerce. According to most estimates, international commerce going through the Strait of Hormuz, and by that I mean obviously oil and gas production and transfer, has gone down by a factor of about 90%. That's 90% of about a quarter of the world's energy production, oil and gas. In turn, an interesting report came out earlier today saying that Iran itself has substantially increased its export of oil from before the war to now because, again, they have control of how things go through the Straits of Hormuz. So that was a report. I cannot confirm it. All this is from different militaries and different state medias that are reporting this. Just because more and more people are joining at this point, I am again going to put into the chat just because I'm trying to give as much information to people as possible. If you're interested in what is happening in Iran and understanding the broader context of how we got to the crazy situation that we're in now, check out the link in the first comment. Sorry, in that comment that I just pasted. That is a link to my upcoming webinar on Sunday talking about what happened in Iran, Iran's history, the Islamic Revolution, how we got to where we are now. Fielding a few more questions before I move on to the next thing that I'm talking about. Saw you on live now. A few nights ago, Israel missile alerts, etc. Is there any evidence that Iran used hypersonic missiles? Iran has said that they have used hypersonic missiles in their attacks on Israel. I've seen no evidence of that. In response to your question, Enzo, I've seen no evidence that Iran has actually used hypersonic missiles. What they have been using is cluster bombs. Cluster bombs are something that is a missile, then as it comes closer to its target, it explodes into several different 5, 10, 20 different smaller warheads that then disperse across a wider area. According to the latest reports of the cluster missiles that were fired at Tel Aviv, I heard that they could cover an area of roughly 25 to 50 kilometers. So that is probably, 25 kilometers is probably, give or take, 15 to 25 miles that they can cover, which obviously makes it a lot harder to intercept. So that's more what they've been using. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the last 5-6 hours, because there's been a major escalation in the missile attacks and the drone attacks from Iran and Lebanon, as well as Israel's retaliations, or Israel's attacks and then the other retaliations in Iran and in Lebanon. So I'm going to talk about that pretty soon. Other questions coming in. What is going on with the Kurds? So, Leona from New Jersey, hi New Jersey, asking what's going on with the Kurds. Nothing. Like, I hate to say this, but a little bit like some of us predicted, me included. The Kurds were a big hype. They were there's going to be a massive invasion of the Kurds. The Kurds sent several dozen people to the border areas. The Kurds do not have an interest in making Iran an enemy. They do not have an interest in taking over Iran. The Kurds are a population spread of 40 million people, give or take, spread across Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey. They're interested in their own state. They're interested in their own autonomy. They might carry out attacks against Iran in order to secure their areas. I doubt that they're going to be the great white hope that Trump and Netanyahu thought they were going to be. At this point, we haven't heard any Kurdish attacks that have happened in the last 3 or 4 days. So nothing's really happening with the Kurds, sorry to say. Taking another moment to have a drink and then going to turn to the next thing, which is going to be a little bit of the data, what has been happening. And also I'm going to relate to, because this is a question I keep on getting asked, why are so many of the Gulf states being attacked, much more than Israel's being attacked? So I'm going to relate to that a little bit. Before, the last thing I want to talk about is the proxies, the Houthis, and primarily Hezbollah in Lebanon, and what's happening there. Taking a moment here. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in meanwhile. Question, what is the latest regarding Israel and Lebanon? Promise you, that's the last thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about it at length. So we're going to get there. Just looking through some of my data here. So, going to now talk about a little bit some of the information with regards to what is going on in the Middle East as far as Iran's retaliations, because this is something that I've been asked a lot. Why is it that seemingly Iran is actually attacking the Gulf states, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, more than it is attacking Israel? Why is that? What do they hope to achieve? So, first of all, just a little bit of data. This is something I collected in the last several hours. In fact, Iran has attacked those Gulf countries much more than it's attacked Israel. 44% of Iran's attacks, this includes both missiles, rockets, and drones, have been targeted against the United Arab Emirates alone, 44%. Another 24% have targeted Kuwait, 14% have targeted Israel, and the rest have targeted Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and 20 strikes have targeted Oman, which is itself interesting because Oman is theoretically a neutral party and one of the negotiators between Iran and the United States. So that's about Iran's retaliation. And the question then is why? Why are they attacking these other states? And specifically the United Arab Emirates, 44%, almost half of Iran's attacks have targeted the UAE. Why, as opposed to their attacks in the United States and Israel? There are two main reasons for this. One, it is easy for Iran to attack these countries, and the types of attacks that they carried against these countries is different than the attacks carried against Israel. What do I mean by that? These countries are, again, by tomorrow, I hopefully will have an interactive map up here, and I'll be able to show this on the map. In theory, not in theory, sorry. In practice, when it comes to geographic location, the Gulf countries, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, are themselves several dozen miles / several hundred miles away from Iranian launchers. The ability to launch rockets and drones against those countries is a lot easier than it is to launch against Israel, which is much farther away. Against Israel, Iran is exclusively launching ballistic missiles because anything else, cruise missiles or drones, would be easily shot down. They would take 5 to 8 hours to get to Israel. So they're easily shot down. So one facet of this is simply it is easier to attack those countries as opposed to attacking Israel. A second facet that is related is the nature of the air defenses and the early warning systems. Israel has a far more developed early warning system and air defense system than those other countries. But ironically, what that means is that Iran can afford to launch fewer missiles at Israel because it can achieve more damage and more publicity and scaring more of the population with fewer missiles. And why is that? I know that sounds counterintuitive, a little complicated. Why is that? When Iran launches a missile at Qatar, if it manages to hit its target, or even if it's intercepted and a fragment hits its target, who is going to be affected are the government of Qatar that knows about this and the civilians in the area where a fragment landed or where the missile landed. So we're talking about several hundred people. In turn, because Israel has an early warning system that warns whenever a ballistic missile is fired from thousands of miles away, what ends up happening is that with a single missile that is fired from Iran, early warning systems will go off in the entire central region of Israel or in the entire northern regions of Israel, sending millions of people into bomb shelters. And so, ironically, because of Israel's early warning system that will warn an entire region to go into bomb shelters, it is actually a lot easier for Iran. Let's say that their aim is to scare or terrorize as many people as possible. With a single missile fired in northern Israel, they can send 1 million people into bomb shelters. In turn, firing at Qatar or Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, a single missile is only going to affect where it lands. They don't have the same early warning systems. And so, ironically, Israel is being targeted less because more people are affected by a single missile. So that's one facet. I know it sounds complicated. It has been proven to be one of the considerations that Iran is taking into effect. One thing. A second reason that Iran is actually aiming more of its attacks. If we actually look at it, if we look at this entire list, 14% of their attacks have targeted Israel, which means that over 85% of their attacks have targeted the Gulf states. Why is that? Because by attacking Israel, they're not going to achieve an end to the war. They might achieve an end to the war. They might achieve pressure in Israel. They might achieve more Israelis killed. That's not going to bring about an end to the war. In turn, the Arab Gulf countries, the fact that they themselves are under fire is leading the majority of them to scream at the United States and say, stop the war. We can't take this. Our civilians are being killed. They're being targeted. We can't take this. And in addition to that, the world is screaming because all of these countries are producers of international energy sources. They are all producers of either oil, natural gas, liquid gas. They are all producers of things that China, Russia, Europe, the entire world, and the United States is dependent on. And therefore, attacking them is, when it comes to a strategy cost-benefit analysis, far more lucrative. Attacking the Gulf countries is going to lead to massive pressure on the United States to end the war, rather than attacking Israel, which is going to lead to pressure in Israel, but not much more than that. And we're seeing this effect. Over the last 2 days, Trump has miraculously changed his tune, and this, by sheer coincidence, has happened alongside these soaring oil prices. As the prices of oil barrels came close to, and at points crossed, $100 a barrel, whereas before the war, they were at $76 a barrel and less, all of a sudden, US President Trump is now saying, we might be willing to talk to the government of Iran. We might be willing to talk to the new regime. After a week ago, he was saying it's too late to talk. Now we might be willing to talk. All of a sudden, he was not issuing death threats and assassination to the new supreme leader. In fact, he was asked earlier today, will you be able to declare victory in the war if Mujtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader, is still alive. And he said, I don't want to comment on that. That's very uncommon for Trump to say, I don't want to comment. I don't have anything to say. That's an indication of the fact that he's realizing the war may have to end soon, probably as a result of those economic stressors the United States is finding itself under. In addition to that, in the last several days, he's also said all of a sudden that actually most of the aims of the war are complete and that we are actually achieved most of what we wanted to achieve, something that Israel is not saying. Now, there's all kinds of speculation that Trump is saying this just in order to bring oil prices down, as more and more investors in the world assume that the war might be over soon, and that may be true. But the fact is that pressure on the economic system and pressures on oil production and on gas production are going to be far more effective on the United States to stop the war, as opposed to people dying in Israel or being affected by the war in Israel, which is why Iran is certainly firing at Israel. But again, 14% of its retaliation has been against Israel. Everything else has been against the Arab and Gulf states, because that is where they hope the pressure will come in the United States to end the war. Once again, I'm going to put into the chat, because more and more people are coming, I'm going to put into the chat a link to my upcoming webinar on Sunday. That is a webinar that is going to talk about the history of Iran and basically how we got to where we are now, the Islamic Revolution. What is a supreme leader and how does this all work? Why we are where we are now. So once again, you have that link in the chat there. Feel free to sign up. Happy to see as many people there as possible. Pausing here, going to look at a couple more questions, have a couple more data points I'm going to talk about before I go to talking about another arena of this war that has been very interesting, which is the arena between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. I saw there were a couple questions about that already. So, other questions? What is regarding Israel and Lebanon? Like I said, promise I'm going to talk about that. Micah says, I think it's not fair to call on civilians. So what can be done? Micah, I need you to explain that question. I think it's not fair to call on civilians. What can be done? Help me understand your question. I agree with you. Civilians should never be in the line of fire. Other question. My feeling is the IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guards, will go underground and become a global terror network. Do they think they'll ever get away? I don't think the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are planning on going underground at all. I think they're going underground right now. I think the regime hopes to just survive until the war is over. And once it's over, which might be next week already, once it's over, then they will be deployed in full force in Iran. But again, we'll talk about that soon. Where is the map we're still waiting for? Micah asks. Like I promised, I actually have bought the technology and I'm going to set up an interactive map here. It was supposed to be installed today. The guy canceled. It's coming tomorrow. I do apologize. Let's see. Other questions. What would it take for NATO to get involved is asked. Theoretically speaking, for NATO to get involved, what would have to happen is a country that is associated with NATO, that is part of NATO, would have to activate Article 5 of NATO. Article 5 is a specific thing within NATO that says if a country is attacked, then that means that all countries were attacked. That was designed within the framework of the Cold War, as it was the Soviet Union, saying you, the Soviet Union, cannot say we're just attacking West Germany. We're just attacking France. We're just attacking Belgium. No, you attack any of them, we activate Article 5. You attack them, you attack the United States. You attack them, you attack the United Kingdom. This was only activated once in history, and that's after 9/11. After 9/11, the United States activated Article 5 and said all NATO countries now must retaliate as though 9/11 happened on their soil. It has never been activated since then. Iran has been trying to go NATO into this because Iran wants to again bring more countries into the line of fire and into a war that will then pressure the United States to stop the war. That is why they launched missiles at Turkey. NATO forces actually intercepted those missiles. However, Turkey did not activate Article 5. A lot of speculation as to why and how. Not going to get into it, but the fact is Turkey did not. So what would it take for a country to activate that Article 5. People are saying hi from Alaska. If you've been part of any of my online courses, then you will know my associate and co-operator of Israel-Palestine Report, Jonathan Belik, who also is from Alaska. So hopefully the two of you are sharing the cold. Okay. Other questions? Micah asks that it's not right to call on civilians to take to the streets for revolutions. I'm not going to comment on what's right or not right. As you know, I don't take sides when it comes to morality or what should or shouldn't be. I will say revolutions and rebellions happen when civilians take to the streets. When that happens, also, civilians die because revolutions are bloody and violent. Is it right or not right? That's up to the civilians and up to the countries. What I am saying is that is what happens. The way rebellions happen is when civilians take to the streets. Will they be killed? Yes. Will it be successful or not? I do not know. But I can't, or it's not that I cannot, I will not comment on whether it's right or not right, because it's my own thing as an academic studying the conflict. I try extremely hard to not bring my own personal opinion into what I'm analyzing. One more time, just putting a link to my upcoming webinar on Sunday, just because I've gotten so many questions on trying to understand the Islamic Republic and how this happens. So I've decided to run this webinar in order to bring people up to speed on the history of Iran. So really would like to see as many people as possible there because so many people are curious. I'm going to take a moment to catch my breath, and then I'm going to turn to the last thing that I'm going to talk about. Actually, two more things I'm going to talk about. One is what's happening in Iran in the last couple of hours, and then what's happening in Israel and Lebanon in the last couple of hours. So catching my breath for a moment. Thank you, Becca. Always my advocate in explaining things to the people in the chat. Can always rely on you. So, last couple of things I'm going to talk about. One of them is what is happening in Iran in the last couple of hours. And the second, which is associated to some extent, is the situation between Israel and Hezbollah, and also what's been happening in the last couple of hours because it's been spiraling. Firstly, in Iran, in the last couple of hours, and I'm just putting this out there because you may hear me talking about this in the next coming days. Chances are I'm going to be interviewed. Those of you who follow me on Live Now with Austin, probably going to be interviewed in the next couple of days. In Iran, in the last couple of hours, there have been reports, and again, these are reports. I've been checking my phone while I'm on here. These are reports that there have been explosions going off within the different checkpoints and different areas of the Basij. The Basij are the most on-the-ground forces that Iran has in order to suppress any potential rebellion. So Iran has a lot of different security forces, the military, the police, the Revolutionary Guards, and the Basij. The Basij are the quote-unquote neighborhood watch. They're the people who deploy in the streets, well-armed, well-trained, well-funded, in order to stop any possible rebellion. Over the last several hours, there's been reports of drones hitting their motorcycles and explosions happening. And there's all kinds of videos happening of, at their checkpoints, explosions going off. A lot of people are comparing this to the beeper attack that happened against Hezbollah. I will say, it's according to at least reports before I got on here, nothing as sophisticated as the beeper attack. These are reportedly drones, suicide drones that are crashing into these different areas. But the reports are massive. The reports are they're happening all across Iran. If that's true, that is going to be, I'm not going to say a game changer, but possibly the beginning of a game changer. It possibly might be one of the things that help suppress the repressive mechanisms happening in Iran in order to facilitate what Israel is hoping that'll happen, that the protesters will take to the streets and a rebellion will start. Putting that out there, I don't have that much to say about that, unfortunately, because again, it literally happened in the last 2 hours, but enough reports started to stream in and enough footage started to stream in that I started to say, okay, I should just mention that. You'll probably hear me talk about that in the next couple of days, but that's happening now. The bigger thing that I want to talk about relates to Israel and Lebanon and Hezbollah. Again, putting into the chat, just because I see so many people coming in, a link to my upcoming webinar on Sunday. What has happened between Israel and Hezbollah throughout the last 12 days, but in reality, the last 9 days, is not only important with regards to the ongoing war of Israel and Iran, it is actually important regarding the larger Middle East conflict after the situation with Iran possibly dies out. What happened with Hezbollah might be a game changer with regards to the trajectory of conflicts in the Middle East and the Israel-Hamas War and wars between Israel and Lebanon. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Initially, when the war broke out, when Israel and the United States carried out their coordinated attacks against Iran, Hezbollah fell silent. Hezbollah said nothing. And that was shocking to some extent. Hezbollah was established explicitly for these 2 weeks. It was established 30 years ago, explicitly for if there is a war between Israel and the United States and Iran, that Hezbollah can launch a massive retaliation coming at the civilian targets in Israel and the soft targets of the West in Europe and etc. And yet they fell silent. Many people explain this as a result of the dire situation Hezbollah is in. And Hezbollah is in its most weakened situation basically since it was established, or since 1991, where it was also in a weak situation as a result of internal conflicts in Lebanon. Within that, Hezbollah has been massively beaten by the Israeli army back in 2024. And in October 2024, a ceasefire agreement was signed between Israel and Lebanon, and the Lebanese military started to deploy against Hezbollah. And in addition to that, politically, Hezbollah has been very, very curtailed within Lebanon itself. So many people assumed that Hezbollah was just standing back because they cannot possibly withstand another round with Israel or the political pressures within Lebanon. 3 days or 4 days into the war, however, Hezbollah changed its tune and it started launching rockets against Israel, but very few. Hezbollah, according to Israeli intelligence, still has between 20 to 25,000 rockets and missiles, has 1,000 long-range missiles that can target all of Israel, and another 15,000 or so medium-range or short-range missiles and rockets that can target northern Israel. They did not pummel Israel. On the contrary, they fired 7 rockets. Then they fired another 9 rockets. What they did do is scream, "Here we are, here we are." They put out within 48 hours over 50 claims of responsibility, screaming, "Here we are, we're firing at you, we're firing at you more, we're firing at you more." They also got more bold. They started launching anti-tank missiles and mortars against Israeli outposts in Lebanon and across the border, killing 2 Israeli soldiers, badly wounding another 8. All this is seemingly part of their strategy to draw the Israeli military away from Iran and into Lebanon, to draw the Israeli military away from its preoccupation in Iran towards there. And Israel's already fully admitted that 20% of its air force is now engaged in Lebanon. That means it's not engaged in Iran. Is that 80% are in Iran, 20% are in Lebanon. Israel is now rumored to be sending ground forces to prepare an invasion of Lebanon. Again, taking soldiers away from being occupied with Iran, intelligence soldiers, logistical soldiers. All this is now focusing much more on Lebanon. That was seemingly the strategy. The strategy was not to defeat Israel, not to kill as many civilians as possible, just to harass in order to get the Israeli military to invade Lebanon and be engaged there. Israel is not losing soldiers in Iran. It is losing soldiers in Lebanon. Again, 2 soldiers killed, 8 already badly wounded, and probably more as engagements continue. Lebanon is already reporting, as Israeli attacks intensify in Lebanon, that I think the latest reports, I think I had them up here, 670 people in Lebanon have been killed. That includes civilians and militants. But the attacks are increasing. Israel ordered evacuation of Lebanese civilians from a series of villages and towns all the way up to the southern areas of Beirut. All this is part of Hezbollah's strategy to pull the Israeli military away from Iran and into Lebanon. One of the phrases I used in an interview the other day, which I really liked, is to get the Israeli military to sink into the mud of Lebanon rather than be in the skies of Tehran. That is the strategy. Why do I say that this is going to have a lot more long-term consequences, even if the war with Iran ends tomorrow? Because this could go in two directions. Firstly, the government of Lebanon is terrified. They have been operating against Hezbollah, and they thought that they were getting somewhere a few months ago with regards to Hezbollah's cooperation. And now Hezbollah has proven that ultimately Iran is still their masters. They're still the ones that will do whatever Iran says, not what's good for Lebanon. Lebanon desperately does not want another round with Israel. That has led to a political schism in Lebanon. It has led to lashing out of the Lebanese parliament. It has led to the Lebanese president and prime minister declaring Hezbollah illegal and saying that any militant activity of Hezbollah is illegal. This is the first time in Lebanon's history that they've done that. It has led to examples of the Lebanese military going in and confiscating Hezbollah weaponry. It has also led as far as the Lebanese president issuing statements saying, we want to have a ceasefire and then direct, not indirect, direct negotiations with Israel over resolving the situation. Is that a peace treaty? Is that not? The Lebanese political establishment is choosing sides, and at least publicly is choosing the side against Hezbollah. They don't want this to be dragged in. So that may have very long-term consequences. On the flip side, what is also happening, the new leader of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, was appointed after the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and his deputy, and who was the other person who was slated to be possibly the next leader, Naim Qassem, until a week ago, was seen as a very weak leader. He is not a militant figure. He is a religious cleric. He is a Hezbollah ideologue. He's not someone who was seen as a militant figure. And in his entire life, he has never led a military campaign. He was not a soldier. He didn't fight. And he was not someone who has led a military campaign. And some people were speculating that's another reason that Hezbollah is not engaging in the conflict. Because Naim Qassem doesn't want to. He wants to be a politician. The flip side from what I said that Lebanon may engage more with Israel on a peace trajectory. The flip side of this is that all of the assumptions that Hezbollah is subdued, that after Hassan Nasrallah's assassination and the massive beating that Hezbollah took, it will now be reluctant to engage in a conflict with Israel, proven not true. Hezbollah is firing countless rockets and drones. In the last 6 hours, there were reports in Israel that Hezbollah and Iran are planning to massively increase their firing over throughout this evening. It's currently nighttime in Israel, in Lebanon. And over the last 6 hours, the reports of barrages of over 100 rockets and missiles fired simultaneously from Lebanon. Naim Qassem is proving that actually Hezbollah is still alive and well, and it's still a militant outfit. And even though there were reports that Israel managed to take out 75% of their rockets and missiles, that still leaves 20,000 to 25,000 rockets and missiles targeted at Israel. So why I'm saying that if the war between Israel, the United States, and Iran ends tomorrow, the situation with Hezbollah is actually going to be the one that lingers on in the Middle East, is because of this joint and somewhat contradictory development, where on the one hand, the government in Lebanon is publicly choosing to go against Hezbollah and saying, we're tired of this. Your activities are now declared illegal, and we're actually going to negotiate with Israel directly to end the situation. And in turn, Hezbollah is not only proving they don't care what the Lebanese government says, but they're also proving to still have militant capabilities and still have militant aspirations, contrary to what was assumed that they might now be going towards a more political route. So those things are going to have massive repercussions as time goes on and as the situation continues to either escalate or de-escalate. I will say in terms of escalation, there were reports in the last 4 hours that Israel sent messages to Lebanon saying, if you do not engage Hezbollah militarily, we will start attacking Lebanese infrastructure. Until now, Israel's theoretically limited its attacks towards Hezbollah infrastructures. I say theoretically because Hezbollah infrastructure includes a building where Hezbollah operative lives. But theoretically, it's only going to do that to Hezbollah infrastructures. Saying that Israel will attack Lebanese infrastructures also means the airport in Beirut, electoral companies, banking systems, etc. I'm not sure how much that threat is credible because there were other reports that Lebanon never actually received such a communique, that was publicized by media in Israel, that Israel's threatening this, but Lebanon actually never received such a thing. I don't know. The situation between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon is spiraling, and the point that I'm trying to make is, while it's not the main arena of the current conflict, it is likely to be the one that stays with us long term. Because the conflict between Israel and Iran and the United States could end tomorrow, could also take another couple of months, could take another couple of weeks, it could end with regime change, or things staying the same way. That we don't know. What we do know is that the situation in Israel and Hezbollah is not the same as it was 2 weeks ago. It is now spiraling towards more rounds of escalations, and that could lead to negotiations in Israel and Lebanon, or it could lead to more warlike situations between Israel and Hezbollah. That is a situation we don't know, but that is going to be what stays with us long term. Before I conclude, last thing, once again, putting for all the people that have just joined, a link to my upcoming webinar on Sunday. I'm going to basically try to explain how we got to where we are now in the Middle East. What the hell happened with Iran? How did it go from being a staunch ally of Israel and the United States? Small teaser, Israel is one of the countries that founded Iran's nuclear program back in the 70s. When Iran was still an ally of Israel and the United States, Israel reportedly started their nuclear program, ironically. Then what happened? The Islamic Revolution. How did it happen? Why did it happen? How did we end up where we are now? Check out that link in the comment. If you're watching this recording later on, I'll put it in the first comment as well. Happy to see anyone there. With that, I'm going to look at a couple more questions that have come in. How is Iron Dome doing in northern Israel? Is it helping Israel? The question was asked. Yes, Iron Dome is actually shooting down most of the rockets, but it is not foolproof. It has not managed to shoot down every possible thing. Other questions. Israel's drone warfare program is widely recognized as one of the most advanced, battle-tested, and capable in the world, ranking. This is not a question. Sorry, you didn't post that question. It's just a comment. Alon, why are the Artesh and the Peshmerga still not actively participating? Alex, simplify that for me. It may just be the hour, but I'm not sure what you're asking. I am sorry about that. Other question. How does Israel always have enough weapons and bombs to drop? For example, Lebanon. Are they produced at home or bought from the US or gifted from the US? The answer, not sure how to say your handle, EXPX, all the above. Israel produces a lot of its weaponry. It buys a lot of its weaponry from the United States. It's not gifted any weaponry from the United States, but it does have aid packages. So how the United States does this is they give Israel an aid package of $1 billion, but the stipulation is Israel is required to use that $1 billion in purchasing things from the United States. So is that a gift from the United States? Israel then buys it back from factories in the United States. None of it's gifted really, but a lot of it does come from the United States. A lot of it's manufactured. I will say Israel's not foolproof with regards to its armaments. And there's a lot of reports throughout the last 2 years of Israel calculating how many bombs it uses, where it uses it, how many interceptors it uses, where it uses them in order to calculate how much armaments it has. So it's not foolproof, but some of it is produced locally in Israel. A lot of it is purchased from the United States, and a lot of it is purchased with money from the United States, filtered back into the system. Enzo asks, does Netanyahu or Israel prefer a civil war in Lebanon and Iran as well? So that's a big question. Is Lebanon heading towards civil war? I think Israel probably, at this point, would like to see a civil war in Iran more than the regime continuing. Israel would obviously prefer a Western-friendly regime in Iran. That would be its first choice. But if it's that or civil war or the current regime continuing, I think Israel would choose that then civil war. And Iran is less likely to see civil war right now because most of the protesters are unarmed. So we're either likely to see the security forces collapsing and the protesters taking control, or mass suppression. That obviously could change at any moment. But that is the current situation in Iran. In Lebanon, we might be spiraling towards another civil war. There's certainly a lot of arms there. That remains to be seen. Forgive me for looking at my phone right now. There are current alert warnings of missiles targeting the areas of Tel Aviv right now. So that's why I'm looking at my phone. Other questions. Would you assume the damaged radar is causing a reduction in interceptions? I'm not sure. There's reports of this damaged radar that happened in Jordan. I'm honestly not sure. I would not assume that, to be honest, but I genuinely don't know. But I think there's enough backup systems that I would not assume that. Alex asks, do you think Israel might stay long and occupy up to the Litani River or further? Yes, I do. The Litani River is an area, you can see it a little bit on the map up here. Difficult to see. I'm not sure if you can see this over here. Once again, I will have an interactive map up here, hopefully by tomorrow. It's an area that sort of demarcates southern Lebanon from the rest of Lebanon. Israel has ordered Lebanese civilians in majority of villages and cities south of the Litani, so the air coast of Israel, to evacuate north. It is carrying out mass bombings there. There are calls from within Israel's parliament that Israel should occupy everything up to the Litani River. Israel did this in the past, in the latter half of the 20th century. Might happen again. Certainly there are those who are thinking that. Don't know if that'll actually happen. Micah asks, what's the forward movement for sovereignty for Judea and Samaria, or as many people call it, the West Bank, in this area over here? By the way, if you're interested in the fact that I use the term West Bank and others use Judea and Samaria, look on my channel. There is a video that I uploaded specifically on what is the West Bank, why do people call it different things, and why do I call it this versus that. A lot of people think it's political. I try not to be political on my channel, as you know. It's more looking at accuracy of the definitions. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to talk about that now, but I promise I will try to refocus on the Gaza and the West Bank in the coming videos. Again, I'm seeing a question here. Where do you see this war in 10 days or 30 days? I don't know. You know, I've been studying the Middle East and conflicts in the Middle East for over 20 years, and the situation continues to surprise me. I could predict if the situation continues where we end up, but Trump prides himself and runs his policies on being unpredictable. While I'm checking my phone now, he could issue a statement saying, actually, we're done, because he got under pressure from MAGA, and it ended up being pressures on oil prices, and decided we're done. So I genuinely don't know anymore where things are going to be. That's why I have these channels to try to keep you up to date on all the things that are happening. What kind of relationship does Netanyahu have with Putin and Zelensky? Netanyahu has tried to maintain good relations both with Russia and Ukraine. Putin is one of the few leaders in the world that send messages to the new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, the son of Ali Khamenei, congratulating him and saying that he hopes that he continues his father's good work. We'll see how things develop with Iran and Russia after the war ends. Okay, with that, it has been an hour and 10 minutes. I am again putting into the chat a link to my upcoming webinar on Sunday. Really encouraging everyone who want to know how we got to where we are now to sign up and try to understand a little bit more about the regional dynamics of the Middle East and its relationship to other countries. If you're watching this recording, once again, you will see this in the first comment underneath the YouTube link. Thank you all for joining, and I will be back soon. Again, probably going to upload on my channel a lot more interviews and commentary in the next couple of days. So if you have not subscribed to my channel, hit that subscribe button. See you soon. Thanks for joining.